All right, so last time we really got into that idea from Adlerian psychology. Existence equals value, and it really got me thinking, like, if our worth isn't from what others think, what role do other people play in our lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a question that Adler himself really wrestled with, while he emphasized social interest, which is, our inherent drive to connect with others and to contribute to something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
He didn't really give us a specific roadmap for what those relationships should look like.
And that's kind of what makes this deep dive so interesting, right? Like, we're taking existence equals value as that foundation, and then figuring out, like, how to think about the value of others within that framework. It's about, like, understanding how our relationships actually serve our needs and our goals, like, as individuals.
Exactly. And the source material that we're looking at suggests that there are three dimensions that we should consider, and those are instrumental value, emotional value, and fairness value. And let's start with instrumental value, which is like the practical side of relationships. Do the people in your life actually help you to achieve your goals?
So it's about, like, tangible benefits, right? The skills or the resources, the knowledge that people offer, or even just practical help. Our source gave that example of, getting career advice, or maybe having someone there to offer life support during a crisis. And those are huge, right? Even if at first glance they don't seem super deep.
Yeah, those are great examples. And it's a good reminder to think about the people who have been instrumentally valuable in our own lives.
Yeah.
What did they offer that actually helped us to move forward? But it's also important to remember that relationships can't thrive solely on transactions, right? So that's where this idea of emotional value comes in.
Okay, so instead of just, what can you do for me? It's more about that deeper sense of connection, the feeling of being understood and supported emotionally. Adler believed this was, like, essential for well-being, and our source actually highlights some of the specific benefits of that, like, feeling understood, experiencing more joy, even alleviating anxiety through those connections.
Exactly. And if you think about the people in your own life who provide that emotional support,
Yeah.
when do you feel most seen and understood by them? How does their presence actually impact how you feel?
That's such a good question to think about. It really makes you realize that relationships aren't just about, like, checking boxes, but about cultivating these deeper levels of connection. And that kind of leads us to the third dimension, right? Which is fairness value.
Right. Fairness is all about the balance of give and take. It's about making sure that both parties are investing in the relationship, rather than one person always carrying the weight. The source contrasts, constantly initiating contact with actually experiencing reciprocal effort from the other person. And I think that's something a lot of us can probably relate to.
Oh, for sure. It's about recognizing those dynamics that feel one-sided and understanding how they impact us. Have you ever felt drained by a relationship where you're always the one reaching out or making the effort? How did that affect how you felt about that relationship and its value?
Those are great questions to consider. And it's also important to remember that these three dimensions, instrumental, emotional, and fairness, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. They often coexist and even complement each other in this kind of hierarchy.
This hierarchy concept is so interesting. The way our source presents it is visually, where instrumental support forms the outer layer, and then moving inward, you have emotional resonance. And then at the core of it all is existential resonance, which is that shared values and deeper meaning. So it's not about choosing one level. It's more about recognizing that different relationships might fit into different levels of this hierarchy.
Exactly. And someone might be a great sounding board for career advice, right? Offering a lot of instrumental value, but not necessarily your go-to person for emotional support, and that's okay. Recognizing these nuances allows us to appreciate the unique contributions of each relationship that we have.
So instead of looking for that one perfect person who fulfills every need, it's more about understanding the different roles that people play in our lives and appreciating them for what they bring. And that actually brings up another interesting point from our source, which is this idea of building symbiotic relationships. Are you familiar with that concept?
Yeah, it's a fascinating concept. It's actually borrowed from biology, where two different organisms benefit from their close association. And applying that to human relationships suggests that both individuals can actually contribute to each other's growth and help each other realize their potential through their connection. It goes beyond just, a simple exchange of favors and looks at the possibility of, mutual flourishing.
So it's about both people contributing something unique and helping each other thrive. It's such a beautiful idea, but I'm curious, like, how do we actually put that into practice? Especially considering that we're all wired to, prioritize our own needs. How do we cultivate that kind of dynamic where both people benefit?
That's where this idea of believing it into existence comes into play. The source suggests that it's about making a conscious choice to see the potential in a relationship and then acting accordingly. Remember that example about choosing to trust a friend and how that trust can actually inspire them to reciprocate, which strengthens the bond.
Right. It's like setting a positive feedback loop in motion where your belief in the potential of the relationship influences how you act, which then influences the other person's response. But, and I'm sure some listeners are thinking this too, doesn't that require a certain level of vulnerability? What if we misjudge someone and end up getting hurt?
Yeah, vulnerability is definitely a part of building deep connections. You can't really experience the richness of a truly symbiotic relationship without opening yourself up to the possibility of being hurt. But it's not about being reckless or ignoring red flags. It's more about using discernment, carefully choosing who we invest in and how we demonstrate that belief.
That makes sense. It's about understanding that not every relationship is meant to be symbiotic, and that's okay. Some people might be better suited for those outer layers of the hierarchy that we talked about, like providing instrumental support or casual companionship. It's about being intentional with our relationships and recognizing their unique dynamics.
Exactly. It's about understanding what we need, what we offer, and finding that sweet spot where both individuals feel valued and supported. It's not a rigid formula, but rather a dynamic process of navigating the complexities of human connection.
Speaking of complexities, even in the best relationships, there are bound to be challenges, right? What happens when that give and take balance gets thrown off, or when one person's needs start to outweigh the other person's? How do we navigate those bumps in the road while still maintaining the integrity of the relationship?
That's a great question, and one that we'll be diving into deeper in the next part of our deep dive. We'll be exploring how to maintain that delicate balance between individual growth and the needs of the relationship, and how to navigate those inevitable challenges that come up along the way. So stay tuned.
We were talking about how even the best relationships run into some challenges. So how do we actually navigate those like inevitable bumps in the road while still, trying to build these symbiotic connections?
That's the thing, right? It's about navigating those complexities that helps make these lasting, meaningful relationships. It's not just about, like, you set it and forget it. We need to make sure that we're actively nurturing these connections, but at the same time, we don't want to fall into the trap of, like, people-pleasing or sacrificing our own needs.
Yeah.
It's a tough balance, right?
Oh, absolutely. And our source material really emphasizes how important it is to have like clear communication and healthy boundaries. It's about being honest with ourselves and with the other person about what we're feeling, what we need, what we're willing to give. It's got to be an ongoing conversation, not just a one-time thing.
Yeah, it's about that constant back and forth, making sure that both people feel heard and respected and supported. But what about when those needs clash? Like, let's say one person wants to move across the country for their dream job, but the other person is like super rooted in their community. How do we figure out what to do in those situations where it seems like, people want different things?
Those are the really tough choices that really put a relationship to the test. They force us to look at our values, our priorities, and how much we're willing to compromise. And sometimes, even when everyone has the best intentions, the healthiest thing might be to let go, even if it's painful.
Yeah, letting go is never easy, but sometimes it really is what's best for both people to grow and change.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that not every relationship is meant to last forever, and that's okay. It doesn't take away from the value of the connection that you shared or the impact it had on your life.
It really makes you think about, all those people who aren't in our lives anymore, but who were a big part of making us who we are today. What did we learn from those relationships? What did we take away that we still carry with us in our relationships now?
It's like this whole web of relationships, right, that makes up a human life. Each one, even if it wasn't forever, adds something to the bigger picture. But let's change gears a little bit. We've been focusing on like the meaning and the emotional depth of relationships. But what about those more practical benefits, the extrinsic rewards that help us deal with the real world and achieve our goals?
That's definitely something to think about. Are those extrinsic rewards like, someone's knowledge, their skills, their connections, are those like inherently at odds with that deeper meaning? Do we have to choose between feeling connected to someone and actually benefiting from the practical support they can offer?
Our source material actually says that a really good relationship gives you both. You can have that deep emotional connection, A&D, get practical support.
Yeah.
You can get your, spiritual needs met while also taking care of the practical stuff. It's not an either situation.
I like how they differentiate the two in the source. They say that intrinsic meaning gives a relationship resilience, like the ability to get through tough times, and extrinsic rewards make things more efficient, helping us reach our goals more easily. It's kind of like having a strong foundation. A&D, a well-oiled machine working together.
Yeah, it's a great combination.
Yeah.
Think about it. Do you have relationships that give you that deep connection, A&D, tangible support?
Hmm.
What makes that balance work? How do those two things like help each other out?
It really paints a picture of a truly symbiotic relationship, right? Where both people get something out of it and grow in real ways. But building something like that takes work, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not just about stumbling across the right person. It's about being intentional, about growing that connection, communicating well, and facing those challenges together. It's something you actively do, not something that just happens.
So it's more than just clicking with someone. It's about showing up every day and putting in the effort to create something really meaningful. And while that might not always be easy, the rewards, both the deep ones and the practical ones, make it worth it.
That's a great thought to keep in mind as we finish up this part of our deep dive.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, what am I willing to put into my relationships? What kind of return am I hoping to get? And how can I play a part in building those symbiotic connections that make my life better?
Those are great questions to consider as we move into the last part of our deep dive. Stay tuned for more. We've been talking about figuring out like the value of other people in our lives, right? And how it's not just about what they bring to the table, but also like how we build those connections to create those symbiotic relationships. But something I've been wondering is how does like the bigger social context play into all of this? We don't exactly live in a bubble.
That's a really good point to bring up because our relationships are definitely shaped by the norms and values of the society that we live in. Think about like the roles that people play, right? Family, friends, colleagues, romantic partners, they all come with these kind of societal expectations that affect how we see their value and how we think we're supposed to interact.
And those expectations can be pretty powerful, right? Like we're often taught to prioritize certain types of relationships over others, like putting romantic relationships on a pedestal or seeing professional connections as purely transactional. So what happens when those traditional models like don't really fit with what we need or want as individuals?
That's where things start to get really interesting because as society changes, we're seeing more and more people who are challenging those old norms and creating their own unique relationship models. We see people prioritizing friendships over romantic partnerships, building strong communities outside of traditional families, and even blurring the lines between personal and professional connections.
It's like we're rewriting the rules, right? Recognizing that those meaningful connections can exist outside of those boxes that we've always been put in. It's about creating relationships that actually nourish us, regardless of what label society puts on them.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that the value we give to others isn't like set in stone. It's something that we create together through our interactions, our choices, and how much we're willing to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of power in that shift, realizing that we can actually shape our relationships in a way that aligns with what we believe in.
So it's not just about finding the right people. It's more about building the right types of relationships, the ones that feel genuine and supportive and fulfilling. And that takes effort, right? It takes being intentional and being willing to break free from those expectations that might be holding us back.
Absolutely. It takes clear communication, healthy boundaries, and being open to giving and receiving support. And it also means recognizing that the value of a relationship can change over time. Something that was super meaningful at one point in our lives might fade as our priorities change, and that's okay.
It's about accepting that change is a natural part of life, and that relationships can evolve, transform, or even come to a natural end, and that doesn't make the impact they had on us any less important.
And it opens up space for new connections that fit with where we are now, relationships that support our current needs and goals. It's about being curious and open and embracing all the different ways that we can connect with each other.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to encourage everyone listening to think about the relationships in their own lives, What are those connections that bring you joy and support and a sense of belonging? Which ones need a little more TLC? And are there any ties that might be holding you back from really embracing the value that other people can bring?
It's a journey, right? This whole dance of connection and growth. And the more we understand about how human relationships work, the better we can create a life that's full of meaningful, supportive, and enriching connections.
So keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep believing in the power of those connections to change not just our own lives, but the world around us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.